Welcome to our town meeting preview meeting. My name is Jim Engel. I am the town moderator. And with me today is Stephen Crane. He's the town manager. We expect to go through the warrant with you so that when you come to our town meeting, you'll have some notion as to what you will be asked to listen to and to vote on. Our meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, May 14th at 7 o'clock. Location is the Middle School High School Performing Arts Center. Although the meeting is scheduled to start at 7 o'clock, we'd ask that you be there sometime ahead of that so that we can start the meeting at 7 o'clock. We do anticipate a fair attendance, and so give yourself plenty of time to register and to enter the room. With respect to entering the room, the attendance at the meeting is restricted to voters with a couple of exceptions. The first exception is that we allow town staff who may not be voters to enter the room. They'll sit in a designated area to the front of the room and will be asked from time to time to comment on articles, mostly to provide information to the audience, to the members of the town meeting, so that they can make an informed decision. Another group of non-voters is oftentimes allowed to enter the room. These non-voters are held in the vestibule of the meeting until town meeting takes an action to allow them to enter the room. When they enter the room, they'll be asked to sit in a designated area. No non-voter is allowed to mingle with the voters, and that's for the purpose that if there is ever a need for a hand count, that we understand who's a voter and who is not a voter. One of the issues that often comes up during the town meeting is that when an article is presented, amendments are offered. We make a significant effort to reach out to people who might be making amendments to submit those amendments to us ahead of time. That allows us to review the amendments as to proper form and legality. It also gives us a bit of a warning that the amendment will be offered and that we can work with the person bringing the amendment forward to put it in proper form and to make that amendment at the proper time during the meeting. The warrant consists of 22 articles. We are constrained by our bylaw to finish our business by 11 p.m. unless the assembly votes to go beyond that. If they do not vote to go beyond that and we are not complete, then we'll have to go to a second night. And there's always a warning that until we take action on all of the 22 articles, the meeting is not complete, and under the prior action will take effect. The warrant is sort of divided into basically three parts. The first part of the warrant, consisting of a number of articles, are the articles that we always see at town meeting. They tend to be standard articles. Their content changes from year to year, but their intent is pretty much the same from year to year. In the middle of the warrant are a number of articles which appear as specific actions at a specific time. So they're not repeat items as the first part of the warrant is. And the last part of the warrant is often populated with citizens' petitions. These are articles that have been brought forward by citizens through a process defined by our bylaws. The current warrant has 5 citizens' petitions, and we'll get to those shortly. So now I'm going to ask for some comments from the town manager, Stephen Crane.
Mr. Moderator, thank you. So each household receives what is called the Finance Committee report. It looks like this, except it won't have my name on it. That's my copy. And so the Finance Committee reviews all of the warrant articles which are approved by the Select Board to create the warrant. So the Select Board creates the warrant. The warrant then goes to the Finance Committee for review, and then the Finance Committee reviews it and makes recommendations. And the recommendations of the Finance Committee, Select Board, School Committee, and in certain cases the Planning Board are then contained in the Finance Committee report, along with some Finance Committee narrative, explain the articles and often their views on it. The Finance Committee report is also very good for having some front-end information, financial information about the town, sort of a financial health report, if you will, about our finances. And so I really encourage everyone who has received this to read the whole thing. And if you have not received it, please contact the town manager's office and we'll make sure we get you a copy. So I will go into the warrants now, with your
Please.
permission.
Please.
So one of the things that that the Finance Committee report does do is talk in some depth about the town budget, and I won't go into depth here, but just make sure that that's one of the foundational functions of town meeting is to approve the annual budget, and so there's a lot of great information in here. There's also our capital plan. There is some detailed information in the report about the capital plan as well. And so now we will go to the warrant. And like as Jim mentioned, there are 22 articles. The first is the consent calendar. This is a standard article which contains fixing compensation for Select Board, Town Moderator, and a few other of our citizen volunteers. There's our standard payment in lieu of taxes from the Electric Light Department to the town finance department, or to the town coffers, if you will, because even though the Electric Light Department is a part of the town organization, they aren't taxed the way like a normal investor-owned utility would be. So, and then there are, we have a lot of accounts that are under, I think Mass General Law requires spending limitations to be set by town meeting. Wharf revolving fund, for example, sanitary housing, shellfish enhancement, I'm just naming a few, the rest of them are in the warrant. And then this is where we appropriate our annual Chapter 90 money that we get from the state to repair our roads, bridges, and sidewalks. And then there's a space here for reports from town boards and committees. This year, we'll be hearing from the 3A Task Force and the Strategic Planning Committee. So then there's the election of Finance Committee members. There's one member up for a re-election or reappointment at the annual town meeting, but nominations can be made from the floor for people who are interested in serving the Finance Committee. And if we have more than 2 nominations, so if we have 3 people who are nominated for Finance Committee, the person with the most votes would receive the appointment. You do not have to have a majority vote. So then Article 3 is the municipal budget. The total amount that will be expended this is for the town side, is $32,279,422. The Finance Committee supports the budget. As the initial preparer of the budget, I would say that it's a pretty status quo level service budget. Not a lot of changes to what we've been doing, and which is why I think the Select Board supported it, and the Finance Committee has as well. Then you also have the School Committee budget, which is $39,616,403. I think the School Committee's budget has also been recommended unanimously by the Select Board and Finance Committee and School Committee. So it's a credit to the town departments and the Finance Committee, as well as the elected school and Select Board, School Committee and Select Board, that so much work goes into the budget and to the budget process that by the time we get here, we've really ironed out all the wrinkles. So I'm pleased that we don't have large issues that'll have to be debated with the budget. It's fairly non-controversial. We also have our assessment from the Whittier Regional High School budget. It's important to know that this is just our annual assessment that is based on enrollment. I know there was a lot of discussion in the community about a Whittier Tech school project that was defeated at the ballot. This has nothing to do with that. This is a standard article in which we are assessed for the cost of the students from Ipswich who go to Whittier. Similarly, Article 6 is the Essex Tech budget, and the same thing, it's just an enrollment-based assessment. It's really tuition for the students from Ipswich who go to Essex. Article 7 is a transfer for the Educational Stabilization Fund. This is funds that are left over at the end of the fiscal year, which the current fiscal year is FY24. The end of the fiscal year is June 30th, which obviously is after town meeting, but the school finance department makes a projection of what's going to be available. The actual amount of that transfer is not in the Finance Committee in the warrant. It'll be made in the motion that's produced on the floor because they're still in the process of doing those calculations. The stabilization account is what enables the schools to have resources available to them in case their existing funding isn't sufficient under our levy limit. And in fact, part of their budget is a transfer out of the stabilization. And when they have money left over at the end of the year, they return it to stabilization. Town also has a stabilization fund that we transfer $73,570 from, and that amount is based on a long-standing policy. Article 9 is what is called Other Post-Employment Benefits Funding, OPEB for short. It's basically primarily the cost of retiree health care, along with some other smaller other post-employment benefits. And many communities make contributions to their OPEB funding trust funds to make sure that the cost of that long-term liability is provided for. And so this is not really an operating expense, it's a trust fund, so the cost of healthcare for future retirees has a resource to provide for it. Article 10 is the capital plan. That total amount is $2,192,774. Projects range from $12,000 all the way on up to I think almost $200,000, sometimes more. And these are a wide range of expenses that are sometimes one time, sometimes maybe not one time but non-regularly. We have some security improvements we're going to be making to the schools for rekeying. We have to make some repairs to the parking lot at the Winthrop School. That's a big item here. The school continues to make annual investments in its technology. That's also one of the larger items. We have a drainage project. There's some work to do our Central Street tip design. Replacing some of our AEDs for the fire department, which are life-saving equipment that are just deployed throughout the town. So it's a long list of things. I'm sort of picking at a few of them, but many of these things are, including vehicle replacements, are things that help our departments function and provide the services to our community.
Stephen, if I could just interrupt.
Sure.
So those first 10 articles are what I referred to as the sort of the usual articles. You'll see those same 10 articles in different forms year to year. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of the articles that are required to sort of keep the business of town and school government going. Mm-hmm. I'd point out a couple of things to notice in your finance report. And if you look at the end of Article 10, you'll notice that there's a comment made in terms of the vote required. Some of these articles require a majority vote, some of them require a plurality, some of them, especially borrowing articles, require a 2/3 vote. So keep your eye on that issue or on that aspect of each of these warrant articles. The second thing to note in the report, and again, if you just look at the end of Article 10, you'll notice that there are recommendations that come from typically 3, possibly 4 different committees or boards in the town. On every article, the select board takes a position. On Article 10, the select board has recommended this article unanimously with a 5-0 vote. On Article 10, the Finance Committee has has recommended this article on a split vote of 7-1 with 1 abstention. The school committee has recommended Article 10, 7-0. If you look through the article in the detail, you'll notice it is a combination of both town expenditures, municipal expenditures, and school expenditures. So we look to the school committee to also recommend. So it's essentially a consensus between the school committee, the select board in terms of allocating monies to support municipal projects and school projects. So that's something to keep in mind as you read the report and as you follow the proceedings of the meeting. I will, as the moderator, announce during the discussion of any particular article what the quantum of vote will be. And we'll note a little bit later on that there is a mistake in this publication. We'll try to point those out today, and we'll certainly point that out as we get to town meeting. So Those first 10 articles are sort of the usual business that annual town meeting is asked to participate in. And now we're going to go into that section of the warrant which deals with articles that don't usually appear. So I'll turn this back to Stephen as we go to Article 11, unless he has some other comments.
Yeah, no, just you had made the comment about the process for offering amendments. And
Yes.
in the Finance Committee report, it says the Finance Committee is, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the Finance Committee, this is what they wrote here. The Finance Committee is recommending this article with 2 amendments. So this is an example of one where they've sort of signaled there may be an amendment. So town meeting voters should be aware that that may happen.
Right.
So the first article that is sort of the not the standard business, as the moderator noted, is Article 11, and this is a zone change proposed for the public safety facility. And this is something that was proposed in large part, suggested by me to the Select Board, but it is sponsored by the Select Board and supported by the Public Safety Facility Committee. This is a sort of unusual thing, Jim, in that zone changes are normally proposed by the Planning Board, and in this case it really has been proposed by the Select Board. The Planning Board has reviewed it and has taken a vote to not recommend it. Just for a little bit of background, the Public Safety Facility has been supported by town meeting voters and is a combined police and fire department facility that is proposed for 36 Linebrook Road. It is completely designed, and it has gone through a pretty rigorous review process by the Planning Board, Zoning Board, Conservation Commission, and there are challenges to the variances that have been granted by the ZBA, which is basically essentially litigation, and the timeline of this litigation could delay the construction of the project a number of years. And so the reason why this zone change is being proposed is to make it so we don't need those variances that we've already received, and we can move forward with the project in the hopes of getting this project completed for the funds we have now. It is not a request for additional financing for the project, but we believe that if the zone change is approved, it'll prevent the need for additional funding.
And I would interject here too that if you notice in terms of the recommendations on this article, we've added a fourth committee. Typically, on any zoning change, the Planning Board is asked to make a recommendation, so you'll see the recommendation there. The other thing to note on this one specifically is that since it is a zoning changes require a 2/3 vote. So on this one, we would be looking for a 2/3 majority vote on this. We anticipate a fair amount of discussion on this article, as we do for every zoning article that comes before town meeting. So listen carefully and act as you feel is appropriate on this article. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks. So Articles 12, 13, 14, and 15 are, and I'm lumping them together because they are articles related to borrowings for our water and wastewater departments. The first one, which is related to the Dow Dam, is the third time this project has appeared on a town meeting warrant. It was on the annual town meeting warrant last year. There was an issue, there was some confusion as to whether or not it was subject to what's in Ipswich is referred to as the Bamford bylaw, which requires a debt exclusion vote for borrowings that are greater than, is it 1%?
1/10 of
Yeah.
0.1%.
0.1% of the overall assessed value of the town, which is over $3 billion. So basically $3 million in borrowing or more, even if under Massachusetts general law, a ballot vote is not required under Proposition 2.5, which is often the case for utility borrowings. Ipswich has a local rule that says if it's worth more than 0.1%, it should go to the voters. So it was listed as subject to a ballot vote in the annual town meeting last year. This Dow Dam project, you can see in the warrant, is not does not clear the threshold for the Bamford bylaw, and so we went back and voted it in the fall, and it was overwhelmingly approved. Actually, it was overwhelmingly approved in the spring and the fall, and then we lowered the amount from 2.5 to 1.5, between the spring and the fall because we'd received $1 million grant, and then we went out to bid, and the project is $1 million more than the bids are actually over $1 million more than we thought we were going to get. So now we are going back to have the authorization of borrow be $2.7 million. This is a really important project. Like I said, it's been overwhelmingly approved. It's unfortunate that we've had these sort of bumps we've had to hit on this, but if this is approved by town meeting, we already have the bids completed and the project will get going right away. And like I said, it's an important investment in our water system. We also have some investments in our water. Article 13 is our water well upgrades, specifically Browns Well and Mile Lane. That's about $1.5 million in investment as well. The one thing I'll say, Jim, as I look at Article 14, which is the rehabilitation of the Plover Hill tank, is Ipswich, I've noticed in the time I've been here, really generously supports its utilities and understands the value of those investments. So these articles, I expect to receive good, strong support from town meeting, because that has been, I think, the tradition here, and that's smart. It's good that the town invests in itself. And then the Article 15, the last of these, is the wastewater infrastructure upgrade, and this is really survey, design, and permitting a new wastewater treatment plant that has been in the works for a number of years. That's obviously a big deal, so we can manage our wastewater discharges and treatment. Article 16 is Chapter 109. It's an amendment to the Chapter 109 of our bylaws, which is generally referred to as a leash law, although it doesn't really directly involve leash laws per se. The reason why the chief of police has offered this is because we are now part of a regional animal control. The town of Ipswich's animal control officer and an assistant animal control officer provides animal control services for the towns of Ipswich, Boxford, Rowley, and Newbury. And we are required by state statute in many cases to provide certain animal control and barn inspection services, and it's very difficult to get people who are qualified to do that. So the fact that we have two makes it so we can provide that service for others. Town meeting actually approved that, I believe, in the fall. The changes to the bylaw are relatively minor, but it's more related to the expense and charging out of people whose animals are sheltered by the town. We do have an animal shelter, and there is an expense to operating it, and this is really designed to create continuity across the bylaws of the other three regional communities.
And Stephen, I'll point out to the audience that on Article 16, the required vote in the printed document says 2/3 majority. On this one, that's a mistake. This is a simple majority.
Because it's a general bylaw change, not a zoning bylaw
Right.
change, right? So that's that one. And I think it's, before we get to the sort of last select board article and getting the citizens petitions, I think it's worth noting that all articles, but especially the ones that are sort of sponsored by town departments, really go through a pretty rigorous process, through introduction, through the first version of the warrant that comes out, through select board consideration. There are a number of public hearings by the board, by the finance committee. School committee does their own hearings on their articles. And so by the time it gets to your doorstep in the form of the finance committee report, there have been a number of meetings and discussions about it. So we hope that folks will, I hope that people have been sort of tracking all of that as we go, but certainly we're available to answer questions before the meeting as well. Article 17 is a change to our bylaws that would adopt what is referred to as the specialized stretch code. The town, some years ago, Jim, I'm not sure, adopted the specialized stretch code, which is now basically, in effect, part of our building code, which has certain standards for energy efficiency upgrades for construction and new construction. We already have the stretch code as a part of our bylaws, so projects who get building permits today are subject to the stretch code, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The specialized stretch code is something that's been proposed by the state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to sort of go and include additional energy efficiency improvements. And really, if I could summarize, I'm going to probably miss a lot of it, but the thrust of it is electrification, really promoting electrification through new construction. There's a lot of information here. There's a lot of information online. There's been a number of presentations that I encourage town meeting voters to take a look at. ICAM, I think, has a number of them hosted probably on their YouTube channel now. but this is sort of an elevation of our existing energy codes for construction.
And I'd make a comment on this. Again, this is an article which was developed, I believe, by the Climate Resiliency Committee, which is a committee in town whose objective is to move the community as a whole in the direction of being carbon neutral, of zero carbon. So it's an initiative on their part to further their objective. We, as a community, benefit from the fact that as we move our community toward electrification, we also have the opportunity to have our municipal electric light department move to a greener power supply. So it's a two-step process here as we move people toward electrification, and then we move our electric department toward zero carbon energy sources. This article.
So just to build on that, and again, because I'm still relatively new here, the town meeting did adopt a resolution, a zero carbon resolution, in the relatively recent past.
Yeah, probably within the last 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think even though this was, and if you were at the fall town meeting last year, the same article came up. There was some confusion about the motion, and so, because it was a close vote and there was some confusion, that when this article came up, the select board wanted to make sure it included it on the warrant, so it could have a fuller or more streamlined consideration process. But it is tied to a prior town meeting action in the form of that zero carbon resolution, and that's, like I said, that's why the select board wanted it on the warrant, because town meeting voters should have the chance to decide it without the sort of hiccups we had in the fall.
Right. And before we leave Article 17, let's take a look again at the quantum of vote. There was a mistake in the printed document. It says it requires a 2/3 vote. This article to pass requires a simple majority. Also note again the benefit of reporting both the select board, the finance committee, and school committee position on these articles. Here's an article that demonstrates a very split response on the various committees. So they'll probably all have something to say at town meeting, and again, it's an article that's unusual, sits in the middle of the warrant, and we'll see a good deal of discussion, I'm sure.
And I think, Jim, one of the things you do as moderator that I think is important for the meeting is allow people to offer minority reports. So so town meeting voters can hear from both sides of an article where there's a split vote.
And I hope that the meeting will be patient because we will, certainly on this article, since the votes are so split, we're going to be asking for majority and minority reports from each of these, at least two of the committees. Probably also the Climate Resiliency Committee will report a vote, and it will. It's important to listen to all sides.
Sure.
So now what we've done is we've sort of left that part of the warrant where the articles have been put forward by staff or by the town, and we move into a number of articles that have been submitted by citizens. Citizens petition is a way for citizens to participate in the formation of the warrant, and they do that by proposing an article or by crafting an article and then getting a number of voters in the community to sign on to a petition to have that placed on the warrant. For an annual town meeting, the bar is fairly low. You need 10 voters to support your petitioned article to get it on the warrant. When we talk about a special town meeting, which we anticipate happening in the fall, the bar is much higher. It requires 100 signatures to get an article on the warrant for a special town meeting. So the next 5 articles have at least, and in some cases quite a bit more than 10 voters who've signed the petition to put these articles on the warrant. So we'll begin with the first article, which is Article 18.
So there's a citizen's petition to repeal the stretch energy code, which, as I just noted before in the discussion of Article 17, is a part of our building code that was locally adopted for energy. And certainly in discussing these, Jim, neither you nor I are speaking for the petitioner. We're sort of just describing what has been submitted and certified by the clerk. And so in this case, it is to the stretch energy code is codified in Chapter 199 of the Ipswich bylaws, and the article would simply repeal that section of our bylaw, which would then return us to a building code that does not include the stretch energy provisions.
And again, here, there was a mistake in the printed document on the quantum of vote. This requires a simple majority.
Mm-hmm. So then Article 19 is, Article 19 is actually, I'm going to touch on something just in terms, Jim has talked about the placement of articles. The Ipswich town meeting warrant, citizens petitions are at the end, and the only thing I would note is that in all the communities I've worked in, citizens petitions are always after the articles that are sponsored by school committee select boards or the boards and committees. Citizens petitions always follow those, so that's why the citizens petitions are where they are. It's a long-standing tradition, and it is a common practice.
And I'll point out too that in terms of the order of warrants in an article, that's totally up to the select board, mm-hmm. because the warrant is their document. And so that if for some reason they choose not to follow tradition of putting a citizen's petition at the end of the warrant, that it makes more sense for that article to be discussed somewhere else in the warrant. They, as they craft the warrant, can so choose. But in this instance, they've chosen to leave the citizens' petitions at the end of the warrant.
So Article 19 is the prohibition on federal immigration officials to work with town law enforcement to identify and detain undocumented immigrants. The petitioner, and he has said this in public hearing, so I'm only reporting what he has what he has stated publicly. His plan is to move to take no action because I think a Supreme Court decision, or Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court decision, basically does the same thing. And so he realized after his petition was filed that it was not necessary, or that the case law made it so.
And that offers an opportunity to talk about something called indefinite postponement, or to take no action on an article. Sometimes as the warrant is being put together and it's posted and published, there's a determination made that a particular article may no longer be appropriate to consider at town meeting for a number of reasons, at which case you can't just simply ignore the article. You have to take some action on the, you have to take, I'll use the word action, take some action on the warrant article. And in this instance, we've had indication from the petitioner that they will move for indefinite postponement, which is essentially to take no action. That motion requires a simple majority. Again, in the printed document, the 2/3 majority vote was a mistake. It requires a simple majority.
So
now, the other thing on Article 19, and I think this is the first place in the warrant where we have this term RATM. If you look at the Select Board recommendation on Article 19, it says RATM. We all pronounce it RATM, and everybody in the room says, what does that mean? Well, RATM means recommendation at town meeting. There are times when a board or committee feels like they do not have sufficient information on an article and on the intended motion to take a position prior to the printing of the Finance Committee report. So what they report as that they will recommend at town meeting. So that prior to town meeting or at town meeting itself, the board will poll its members and actually take a position. So there will be a position taken eventually, but in the meantime, it's recorded as a recommendation at town meeting. I should also point out that there's been a little bit of confusion in the past about polling committees at town meeting and whether that's actually a violation of the open meeting law, because any deliberation, any votes taken by committees by law have to be done at a posted meeting where the item is listed as an agenda item. There is an exception to town meeting, because as amendments come forward, as motions might get changed from the public hearings where votes were recorded, it becomes necessary to re-poll a committee. So what looks like a bit of confusion on the stage where committees are talking amongst themselves is just simply polling their committee to see if their original recommendation stands or if their recommendation should be changed. So anticipate some of that, and particularly where amendments are offered. It's oftentimes necessary to re-poll committees or to poll committees who haven't taken a position that they've recorded at all. So that's, again, that's the first time we see this term RATM, recommendation at town meeting, and that's what that is all about.
So since we're sort of in the nuts and bolts of town meeting stuff, which I enjoy, I know you do, but sometimes to the casual viewer may be a little wonky. Once the petitioner realized that their article was not needed because of other case law, they made a request to withdraw the article. And the reason why it is still here, even though we've known that for a while, is because once the citizens have signed the petition and their signatures have been certified and it has been accepted by the clerk, it must be in the warrant. And so that's why, even though it's sort of going to be set aside and postponed indefinitely, it still remains in the warrant because it followed the citizens petition process. So Article 20, this is a charter amendment to give the select board exclusive authority to appoint members of the planning board. Charter changes are things that happen from time to time. Currently, the planning board is appointed by the town manager, which has been the case, I think, for many, many years, but this would seek to make it the select board to have the authority to appoint members of the planning board. There's been a lot of discussion about this. I expect there to be more. I'll just state because it would take basically an appointing authority away from the town manager. It's in Massachusetts and in the communities I've worked, there's been different methods of appointment of boards and committees, including the planning board. So select boards appoint planning boards, town managers, sometimes they're elected. So this would sort of change what the process here in Ipswich, but it would still be consistent with how planning boards are appointed elsewhere. Article 21 is a citizen's petition, a prohibition on warrant articles citing mankind's impact on climate change as a justification. We talked about the stretch code and specialized stretch code, and the town meeting had previously adopted a zero carbon resolution. The petitioner is offering this, and I'm sure there'll be some discussion about how binding this is upon future town meetings. And then finally, Article 22 would be a vote to evaluate, a citizen's petition to evaluate the electric light department governance structure by the Government Study Committee, which is a committee established under the Ipswich bylaws to study things like our government structure. So this is a petition to specifically look at the electric light department commissioners, which is currently the select board, and look at a potentially different structure. And in the warrant, it talks specifically about an elected elected light commissioner. Sorry, excuse me. So. This would ultimately, this could lead to a charter change, but right now what the petition is for is just for a study.
With respect to Article 22, maybe a couple of comments about the Government Study Committee and the process by which people have access to the Government Study Committee. Government Study Committee is charged with looking at the form of the government, the form of our organization, how we run our business in town. And it receives its charge in two different ways. First, the select board can refer topics to the Government Study Committee, or citizens by petition can refer topics to the Government Study Committee. This is an instance where citizens have come forward, felt they had a reason to have something studied, put it on the warrant, and if by simple majority the meeting supports that request, then it will go to the Government Study Committee. to be followed at some future date by a report back to town meeting as to the findings of the Government Study Committee on this topic specifically, and in any topic that might get referred to them in the future. Going to emphasize, so that's the end of the warrant. I think if there are any questions, you can certainly send them to me. My address is on the town website, moderator at Ipswich.
ma.gov, Yep.
ma.gov, that's moderator at ipswichma.gov. I won't promise that I'll be able to get back to all of your questions, but I will try. This tends to be these next few days tend to be fairly busy as we get ready for town meeting. Emphasize quorum. We have a quorum of 200 voters, and so we need to keep 200 voters in the room through the entire warrant. And again, I'll repeat myself, that until we conclude business on all 22 articles, none of them take effect. So it's important that we keep the quorum. My job is to make the meeting smooth, effective, and interesting enough to you, so that you'll stay through the entire proceedings. Again, we have a bylaw which says by 11 o'clock, if we have not concluded business, we cannot entertain any new business unless we receive the approval of the meeting. And the approval of the meeting has to be at least 200 voters. We have to have a quorum at that point.
And we always know, because we have electronic voting, which works extraordinarily well, but also we don't have to eyeball what the quorum is because we can see in the votes. And I want to emphasize what Jim is saying here, that it is really important that people really, I'll sort of editorialize here, have respect for the process and the warrant and the work that went into it by many, many people to get it here to voters, and respect that effort enough to stick around till the end, so all of it can be done and we can deliver our, the things that we need to provide quality services to Ipswich residents and, throughout the coming year.
And just a couple of other comments in terms of the logistics. As the manager has mentioned, voting on all articles is done with electronic registers. So as you sign into the meeting, you'll be given a keypad from which, when we call for votes, you'll be asked to say yay or nay on the vote. It's a very efficient process, and it has removed a lot of the ambiguity about hand counting that used to be the past practice. But you will also be given a paper ballot. Should there be an issue with the electronic system where we need to go to hand counts, that we can use the paper ballots, and we'll do the old-fashioned hand count. That paper ballot and the electronic register is also your ticket to entry, so that if you don't have both of those in your hand as you go through the door, you will be asked to step aside and wait for the vote of town meeting to admit you. So keep them handy. In terms of the layout of the meeting, it'll be basically the traditional layout. There'll be microphones at the front of the auditorium. There'll be a microphone reserved for proponents of the article. There'll be a microphone reserved for the opponents of the microphone. We do that for the purpose of providing some balance to the discussion. We'll move from the pro mic to the con mic in turn, so that everyone has an opportunity to speak in a balanced way. On some articles, the moderator may notice that there is a lineup at one of the microphones, and there's no one at the other microphone, so that it would seem that a series of speakers, either opposing or proposing the article, may be not counterbalanced from the other side, at which point the moderator may call for a vote in order to sort of expedite the meeting and to provide an opportunity for us to get through all 22 articles by the end of the meeting. In the center of the auditorium is a microphone for questions, because oftentimes people have questions in terms of the process or procedure. We'll look to that microphone for questions only. It's not an opportunity to jump the line. It's not an opportunity to make statements for or against a particular article. It's just simply to ask clarifying questions. And I think that's the message that Steve and I wanted to deliver this morning, or today. We hope that that you will go through your Finance Committee report, that if there are any questions that you have on that, if we receive them ahead of time, that always helps. Again, if there's an article that you feel deserves to be amended in a particular way, we would appreciate, and out of respect for the rest of the people in the audience, that be presented in a written form, unless it's sort of extemporaneous when you come to the meeting and it simply occurs to you at that time. But do think about amendments and what you might amend, and have those in writing to us beforehand.
Jim, isn't it the case that even if you're making an amendment sort of that you think of during debate, it still needs to be written and submitted to the moderator?
I would suggest that that past practice is a good practice. It makes sure we understand what your motion, what your amendment really is, because sometimes the spoken amendment, if we ask you to repeat it, it comes out differently.
Yeah. And very precise in terms, and actually it's something I want to touch on, because the precision of what the town meeting is voting on is very important. It's in my world, it's, words matter.
Yeah.
And how things are stated and what the motions state is very important, because it's binding. It's a binding decision for that particular article. Ipswich, in the pack where we have town meeting, it has two screens where we put up. The motion is often put up on the screen, and sometimes supplemental materials are put up there. There's going to be a document that has motions that will be each of the people making the motion, which is usually members of the select board, members of the school committee. The written motion that they have in their hands is the official motion that the clerk is going to note for the minutes. The slides are just for guidance purposes for town meeting, and that's important because we talked about the mistakes on the quantum of vote in the document. Sometimes mistakes happen. There may be a PowerPoint slide that has a word wrong or something, but the motion that is made by the person holding the papers is the one that town meeting is voting on. The ones on the screen are for illustrative purposes, and I think that's an important distinction for people to know. And then the last thing I'll say is, and then I can turn it back over to you, Jim, for our final guidance. At the back of the Finance Committee report, we've used some of this terminology here. There is a glossary of terms. I encourage people to review the glossary and familiarize themselves with some of the terms, because they will be likely mentioned in some of the discussion. And there is also a Moderator's Guide to Town Meeting. I will say Jim referenced Town Meeting Time, which is a book that is sort of the handbook, if you will. It's sort of this unique thing. It's not a law, but it is the guiding document. It's the guiding handbook for all town meetings in Massachusetts. And so I'll just leave you to talk about that, and thank ICAM for their time. Jim, I want to thank you for all the time you put in as moderator.
Thank you, Stephen, and for your work too in putting this together. Again, we encourage you to join us on the 14th of May. That's Tuesday, the 14th of May, at the Performing Arts Center at Middle School, High School at 7 p.m. Come early and stay as late as we need you, because we do need you at the meeting. And thank you for your time.